guys, it's Amber. So today we are going to be doing an Ask a Stylist. I've been trying to get back to my roots and talk a little bit more about hair things. So I don't know if it was just traumatic for me, but I was so sick with my last baby, and just the thought of being in my salon, I associated with being so sick and working that I was just like done. I was so done. I quit doing hair. I did not want to do it anymore. I couldn't wait to be done. I didn't enjoy doing hair anymore. That's why I really stopped talking about hair stuff. I just wanted to focus on makeup because that's what made me happy. That's what made me feel better. But a few months after I quit and I had my baby, I started realizing like, oh, I really miss this. So I started, doing more friends and family and picking up, and now I'm in the process of kind of remodeling my salon because I've had a new renewed sense of joy and excitement for doing hair again, and I'm just really excited about it. And I've got some really fun things going on in my little home studio, so I'm gonna give you guys a tour once it's all done. I know I said I'd do that a few years ago, but I think that was when I was pregnant, and I just didn't feel good. I didn't feel it. I was just done. I was just bleh. But I'm back. I'm going back to getting some more hair stuff going. And so today we are talking about how to master your gray coverage. Now, whether you are a stylist, whether you get your hair done in a salon, or whether you do it at home and you've got gray hair, these are tips that you can definitely use. Now, if you don't have gray hair, you're probably gonna have gray hair someday. And I'm not talking about dyeing your hair silver gray. Now, I think gray hair can be stunning and beautiful. Natural gray hair, dyed gray hair, whichever. And if you embrace your grays, I think that's amazing. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think there are some women who pull off the most beautiful silver or white or salt and pepper hair, and it just has the right flecks of light and dark in it, and it can look amazing. But for those people who feel very self-conscious about it, for those people who don't like it, these are the tips and tricks for you. So I'm not saying if you have gray hair, you have to color it by any means, but hopefully these will help you if you decide to. So first of all, decide what kind of gray coverage are you looking for. Now, if you have, brown hair, blonde hair, and you just want to kind of mask your gray, kind of glaze over it, then I would suggest going with a demi-permanent. What a demi-permanent is going to do is something like Shades EQ. So if I was a blonde and had some gray hair, this is something that I could use. This is a 9NW, so it's a neutral warm. Basically, it will just give a little bit of pigment and color to those gray hairs, and it will leave them a shade lighter than the rest of your hair. So especially if your hair was like brown and you just wanted those to kind of look like highlights, you could throw something like this over your hair. And I'm not talking about if you have regrowth, I'm talking about if you just have some strands throughout your hair. You could easily glaze with something like this, and it gives the hair the most beautiful two-toned effect, and it actually kind of goes with like your natural highlights where your gray would be, and it's really beautiful. Now, the trick with this is when you go to retouch it, you have to make sure you don't pull it through every time, because then the highlights will get darker, and it just depends on how much your hair fades and things like that. But this is quick. It's a 20-minute processing time. If your hair is a little bit more resistant, you can pop this under the dryer. It'll give it a little more solid coverage. But if you want it just to be a light glaze over those grays, just process this at room temperature for 20 minutes or another demi-permanent that you can buy, and you'll get a nice sun-kissed look with your gray hair. Now, the same thing can be done if you have gray hair and you want to just take it from being white to silver. This is a great time to pick up something like the 8T from Redken Shades. You can put that on and it will just make your hair look more silver and more gray than white. This is something that I did with my dad before he passed away, and it was kind of funny because my mom didn't know that I colored my dad's hair, and I had an appointment for my dad to come in. And my mom was like, oh, I'm gonna come with him. And I was like, oh, Dad, are you okay with that? And he's like, oh, yeah, that's fine. So I started getting out the color, and she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, yeah, she's been dyeing my hair for a while. And she was like, what? So I actually used the color Camo from Redken. I used to say, it puts more pepper in your salt, because it basically just adds more gray depth to white hairs. My dad used to have like a little streak in the front of white. The rest of his hair was a dark ash brown and little bits of white and gray throughout, and so it would just color that little part in the front that was so white and make it more like steel colored, and it looked so amazing, and my mom didn't even know. So those are some options too. The color Camo for men is only like 10 or 15 minutes. It's super quick processing time. But if you are doing men's hair, make sure you keep it cool, because men typically don't like really warm hair. It just doesn't look as natural. So you always like to go with the cooler shades for men's gray coverage. All right, so let's move on. Now, if you're wanting full 100% gray coverage, there's lots of different options. Some people can get gray coverage with just a regular dye, but when it comes to a point where you need a more intense pigment, I would suggest going with a gray coverage color. So this is Redken Color Fusion. This is their double N series, and this is what I use on 90% of my colors when they want a natural neutral brown. I think that this goes slightly warm, but in a good way, not in a brassy way. It just looks like natural hair. It doesn't look like red at all. It just doesn't pull ash. They also make it NA, which is really pretty. And my favorite combination is mixing half of this and half of the ash, and it makes a perfect ash brown. So if you're needing ash, that's my favorite combo. The thing I like about this is it covers the gray very well. This has a 45-minute processing time, and I typically put it on the roots first, and I'll leave it on the roots for maybe a good 15-20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes if the rest of the hair doesn't need to be refreshed. And then I can pull it through the last 5 minutes, the last 10 minutes. I could use a glaze like Shades EQ. I could add a little bit of clear with this and pull it through, or I could just pull through this color. It just kind of depends on how much refreshing that they need. But that's why it's nice to have a demi and something like this, is you can put this on the roots and refresh in a sister color in something like Shades EQ or Color Sync. I mix those. So if you pull a gray coverage color through every time and you just put it all roots to tips, what's going to happen is those porous ends are going to start to soak up the color, and over time you're getting color over color over color, and your ends are going to start to get darker. So what I see oftentimes when I do color corrections on people who've been coloring their own gray is they have gray, they have the spot they colored last time that didn't cover 100%, so it's kind of like a brown faded off gray, and then they have a myriad of brown, and then the ends are black. And I can't tell you how many times I've fixed this, and the problem is they're putting it on from root to tip, and they're letting it process the entire time, and that's where you're going wrong. So you have to make sure that you're putting it on the gray roots first, and then address how much needs to be fresh afterwards, and that will keep it from over processing on those hairs. And not, I mean, you think over processing for blonde, sure, but it can actually over process on dark hair and just suck up the color. So if you don't have very resistant gray hair, I would start with that, going with a gray coverage color on the roots, let it process first, and then either glaze it through or whatever else you need to do. A lot of my clients, I don't even have to pull it through because the color lasts so good that I have like very minimal. I might just like shampoo it out and kind of like shampoo cap it at the shampoo bowl, which means I basically take some shampoo, take the color, kind of wash it through, let it sit out a couple minutes just to refresh and shine it, rinse it off, you're good to go. So if I have resistant grays, this is what I do. First of all, if I have those places around the hairline that just never cover, what I will do is I will actually pre-soften the grays. I will take the color straight from the tube, and very first, before I do anything, I will take the color and I will take it with my glove and just right there, just right on those places that are super hard to cover. And usually it ends up being right here. Once in a while, I have somebody with a stubborn spot right here in the front, do the same thing, just put the color straight on. What that's going to do is just kind of help open that cuticle a little bit, and with that intense pigment, so once we go back with the color over it, it'll have time to soften it up. It allows it to penetrate it better. So then what I do is I go through and divide into 4 quadrants. So if I was coloring my hair, I would divide it at the back, and I would divide it at the sides. So then I start at the back, and I take a little section like this, and I use a tiny brush. If you don't have a tiny brush, cut yourself a brush like this, because this makes all the difference when you're trying to retouch gray hair. Because if you're using a big flappy brush, you're gonna be slopping that color up and down. You don't need to be wasting color like that. You can have so much more precise and control. You can tell this is much loved because look at how dyed it is. When you use a small firm brush like this is from Redken. Guys, I was trained with Redken. That's what I use in my school, so that's why I'm like Redken, because I've used it for like 13, 14 years. It's what I trained with when I went to cosmetology school, so that's why I use so much Redken. Anyway, so these brushes seriously make all the difference, and you can just cut your brushes from just Sally's or whatever. So I've got this sectioned out, and then so I don't have any spots that are left out, I go through and I take this brush and I go through the quadrant and I just outline it. So I would take my little section here and I would put it all along the roots like this. And you want to make sure like the places behind the ear and around the nape of the neck. When I have people who color their hair at home and then they come in for haircuts and I see that, I'm like, that's why you need me, okay? So I have converted quite a few people though. I make sure you outline the section. That's going to make sure you don't get any little spots, because with gray coverage, if you miss a spot, is a big deal, like it shows. Go ahead and outline your section. So I do the top and I do the whole side, but typically I start this whole process on the back, but I'm going to show you on the side for ease. So then I take my little section, I go ahead and get the color right on the bristles, and I just press it into the gray, and then I pick it up underneath. You also can do a bottle if you like to. I just prefer the brush. Then I go the next section, I press it up, I use the back of the comb to part the hair, and then I do the same thing. I do the exact same thing when I'm using a blonde lightener, but I am super careful because you do not want to overlap. That's a whole nother video on lightening. So if you guys want to see a video on like using high lift colors and bleaches all over, let me know, because that's a whole different animal. But I just go through, press it in, press it in. You want to make sure you saturate the hair efficiently, because if it gets dried out, it's just not going to cover as well. And like I said, you do not want spotty color. So once I go through, I have like all these little sections. Then I move to the next section. So I do that on both back sections, and I move to the side. And you want to make sure that you mix up enough color, especially if you're mixing shades, so you don't end up with like the back one color and the front it was a little bit different color. So make sure before you start that you have enough color. So then, now that I've done that, you know, that might have taken me, will take me like 15 minutes, probably takes you longer, I don't know. By the time I've gotten to the front, that sat on a little bit, so then I go through and go over the section when I'm outlining it, and I get that coverage really good. So the next thing I do is, if that still needs a little bit more coverage, I will pop gray under the dryer. It's something that I learned in beauty school. It's something people in the salon do. Now, not all colors, and I don't even think Redken does, recommend that you put their colors on the dryer. Some colors will liquefy under a dryer. So like you literally have like color bleeding out of foils, and it can be a hot mess. So I tell you this cautiously, because now when I was an instructor, I used to work at a beauty school. I could only do things that were on manufacturer's directions. So they'd be like, I have this problem, and I'm like, I can't tell you how to fix it. Because like I wasn't allowed to say things that are against manufacturer's directions. I'm like, come talk to me after school and I'll tell you. But so I will say that some colors do not recommend this, but I've had no problem doing that with Color Fusion at all. So take that for what you will. Use at your own risk, but I do pop it under the dryer for just about 10 or 15 minutes, and I will get that 100% gray coverage. And the last thing I do, if you're still just having a slightly difference and it's not giving you 100% gray coverage, actually I do this before I do the dryer, but I just mentioned that first, is I use these Power GOD Gray Oxidizing Drops. Now these are professional, so you can buy them at Salon Centric. Yes, my box is dirty because I'm usually grabbing them when I have color on my hands. So this is a little dropper, and I basically, it says on here how much you put in. So if you're having 2 ounces of color, you add 10 drops, and that's for like levels 1 to 7, so darker shades. If you are doing 8 to 12, so lighter blonde shades, you mix 5 drops. It doesn't change the color, but it does add a little bit of warmth to it in the bowl. So the mixture looks a little more red, but I promise it doesn't make your hair red. But on people that pull really red, this sometimes can influence it a little bit. Just so you know, I've had a few people that I had to stop using this on because they were someone I'd put ash on, it would turn red. You know those people? Then I wouldn't recommend using this, but on the standard color, I put these in, especially with the darker shades, it works great. I even used this on like a level 9, where I was still getting a little bit of like lighter than I wanted. I would put it just like 2 drops in there, and I would foil that in, and boom, perfection. So those are my arsenal. And I know this works because I've actually had people, when I've moved salons, they'd be like, oh, you know, you're too far away. They'd go somewhere else, and they'd call me in 2 weeks saying, Amber, I just got my hair colored somewhere else, and the gray's fading off. And I'm like, it's all right. Would you like to come in Friday or Saturday? So, and I'm not trying to be boastful or anything. I just know that these are the things that work, and I'm glad that my clients know, because a lot of my clientele has gray hair. I do a lot of women that are professionals, business women that need to get their hair looking good. They need it covered, and they need it looking perfect every time. So these are the things that I use to make sure that happens. Another thing is, don't skip time on processing. If you have gray coverage, please do not cut corners. Please do not think it can process in 30 minutes. If you have normal hair, you can process this for 35 minutes. But if you have resistant grays, I highly recommend you leave it on the full 45 minutes. But please, 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 please. I used to work with a lady who would wash her colors out at 25, 30 minutes because she had a schedule. And if you are overbooking yourself so much that you cannot process your colors 45 minutes, and maybe you need to like stop and take less clients, because that is what makes your gray not cover as well. And that's the complaints I get from other people. They're like, I barely processed. I was like sitting there for 20 minutes. She's already washing the color out. I'm like, why spend all the money on the color if you're just gonna wash it down the drain before it's even done? So take the time. If you like to double book, 45 minutes is plenty of time to get a haircut in if you want to. I don't ever double book because I like to give my people 100% my time all the time. Other people, they like to double book. 45 minutes, just put a haircut in. Totally not a problem. Another thing is developer. Now, there are some people who think that it's better with 10. I always use 20. I always use 20 volume because I feel like it lifts it up enough and then it can really give good coverage. But some people have used 10 and they say that works good. So, I mean, that's going to be more personal preference, but usually the rule of thumb is 20 volume. With developer, make sure you're using equal parts. And if you are having stubborn gray, sometimes using just a titch less developer makes the color a little bit stronger, and that can help as well keep it thick. If your color has too much developer, it's going to be runny and it's just not going to stay where you put it. So that can be a problem. And just because you have gray hair does not mean that you can't have like fun colors or do whatever. I mean, you can still pre-lighten hair. You can still do reds and golds and cool tones and all these things. This is just your basic gray coverage I'm going over, which can help with coverage. But I mean, I foil people with multicolors, red and black and blonde and any color under the sun with gray hair. So that is definitely possible, but these are just my tips for regular gray coverage. Another video I could do is talking about how to grow out your hair from gray and the ways to get away from coloring it and going to natural, if that's something you guys are interested in. My last tip for you is if you have someone that is having a hard time covering and you do everything that's having a hard time and they're neutral, sometimes I find warm tones will cover better than ash. So if you're using an ash coverage and it's just not giving it to you and you're trying all the tricks, switch. If you can talk them into switching to a little bit warmer color, and I mean using a neutral with just a dab of red, sometimes it's just that red, it will just cover the gray easier than ash. I don't know why. I don't make up the science, I just do it. So those are all my tips and tricks for getting the best gray coverage. So the nice thing about this is if you do your gray coverage efficiently, it should last. It shouldn't fade off. You don't have the cost of using so much color because you can just literally just touch up the roots and then just glaze it. Your clients are going to be happier. You're going to be happier if it's covered all the way. I think I covered everything. If you guys have any tips and tricks on how you get your gray coverage, leave them down below. And if you have any other requests for another Ask a Stylist video, let me know as well. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave. It's very important that you do that so you don't miss any videos from me. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.